Hello, class. This week we're going to be talking a little bit about creativity across the lifespan. My name is Dr. Neil Sogi, and I will be your professor for this course. Now, when we think of creativity across the lifespan, or if you will, the developmental psychology of creativity, or maybe to put it another way, the developmental expression of creativity. That's what we're going to be kind of giving some thought to today. So basically, at what point in your life can you expect to produce your best work and to be the most productive? That's what we'll be taking a look at today, as well as what are the phases that a person typically goes through throughout their lifespan development in order to become a well-established artist. Well, a high authority on research into visual artists, a professor by the name of Ellen Winner of Boston College, or formerly of Boston College, she's now retired, spent most of her career focusing on two broad issues in the area of cognition in the arts. First off, the impact of arts education on the development of thinking dispositions or habits of mind, such as reflection and exploration and observation. And secondly, she also did a lot of research on experimental aesthetics. So examining how we reason about philosophical questions about the arts. Questions such as why we dislike perfect fakes and how we judge skill in abstract art. Those kinds of things. Now, something that Dr. Winner noted was that if you look at true visual art prodigies, people who are noted for being great visual artists, at an early age, there is something that tends to be true for them. They tend to be pre-conventional in their thinking about visual art, at least to start with. Now, if you know about moral development in psychology, there are three levels of cognitive thinking within that domain. Pre-conventional, where someone ignores the rules or maybe doesn't know the rules. Then there's conventional, where someone knows the social rules and follows them. And then post-conventional, where someone surpasses the rules to better follow the true principles that the rules are meant to uphold, or maybe challenges bad rules to try to improve society. Well, Dr. Ellen Winter, this noted noted that visual art prodigies tend to be pre-conventional in their thinking and style. That is, when the visual prodigy creates their work, it has an unusual look. And now, remember, when we're thinking of a prodigy, we're thinking of someone that is noted for their skill at a very early age. So here, you can think of a visual prodigy creating a work that has an unusual look. And here we can think of something that looks more like American expressionist work. But as this visual art prodigy begins to grow and develop their skills and their technical knowledge, that work becomes more conventional. And Dr. Winner then notes that if that artist, that visual art prodigy, keeps engaging in that field and keeps on that path of growth. And so here you can think about after they've totally mastered the technical aspects and conventional rules of their field, they eventually surpass the rules and start a new convention or movement. So they move through these phases of being pre-conventional, not following the rules, and then following the rules and becoming more conventional. But then after they master those rules, they start to move into a post-conventional phase where they eventually surpass the rules to start this new convention or movement. And it is here that you can think of a highly accomplished artist that now has a strong reputation, and such a strong reputation that they're able to take what we could say is poetic license with their works. And that is the type of thing that I'd like to talk about now, is to talk about how we can move through these phases of creativity within the lifespan. So there are basic steps that we're going to look at. First, we need to think of interest. Creativity begins with interest in a field. Creativity begins with exposure to a particular domain, often through the family or through the parents. If exposure to the domain happens outside of the family is normally very supportive of its development. So the child is exposed to the field and domain, and the interest grows and develops until it becomes very consuming. And that's something that we see very oftentimes. So what ends up happening is that the child starts to develop what is called an autotelic experience. So that it is an internal reward that the artist has for simply doing the work. We may be there may have been an external reward at some point very early on, but it soon becomes that there is an internal reward for simply engaging in this. So with the interest, there also needs to be the next step, which is mentoring and getting trained within the field. So training is the next step. And in this case, the student needs to be exposed to feedback for improvement of the skills and engagement. So if you think back to the systems of creativity, remember Csikszentmihalyi, that you need, he would suggest that you need to know the domain really before you can make innovations within it. And so that is what the mentoring helps you to do at this second stage. First you have interest, then you have the mentoring and training. And it helps you to learn the domain and to get feedback from someone who is a master in the domain on the work that you are doing. And the role of the parents during this time really is just facilitation normally. You don't want them over involved in the training by the parents. Eventually then comes domain mastery or technical proficiency. At this stage, the artist understands the state of the art, where things are historically within the domain, and they have technical ability within this domain. So researchers like Chase and Simon have done some work here, and what they've recognized is that it takes a long time to gain mastery, and they would suggest that it takes approximately 10 years to gain mastery within a particular domain so that you understand the rules of the domain and that you have technical prowess in that domain. And it seems that this varies a little bit from domain to domain, but it seems that this is a good average across domain. So it becomes 10 years to become truly efficient, for example, in particular musical instruments, although that might be a little bit less in some areas and a little bit more in other areas. So, for example, some researchers have suggested it can take less time to gain this proficiency in the musical field of jazz, for example. But it may take more than 10 years in certain domains. So, for example, if you are working in medical sciences or in a very highly specialized field where it requires a large amount of training, it may take more than 10 years. Now, generally speaking, what you can think of is you can think in terms of 10,000 hours or 10 years. Either one is a good guide. Now, if you have ever heard of Malcolm Gladwell, he's an author, researcher. He discusses this in his bestseller called Outliers. And what he would say is that to become an expert, it takes 10,000 hours, or approximately 10 years, of deliberate practice. But deliberate practice is a specifically defined term. It involves goal setting, quick feedback, and countless drills to improve skills with an eye on mastery. So it isn't just simply doing something, but doing something in a disciplined way under the guidance of a true master of the field. So 10,000 hours or 10 years, roughly speaking. You need to kind of remember, though, that this is domain specific. But let's take, for example, Juilliard schools for drama. The way that they have their program set up is that within 4 or 5 years, you are spending so much time and being so intensive and practical that you get very close to that 10,000 hours of experience in a shorter amount of time than 10 years. But it's putting in the time. It's putting in the time with an eye at technical mastery that's really important here. So technical mastery is part of this development that the artist will go through. However, it isn't just the domain in isolation. That's the thing I want you to kind of remember. It's doing it and receiving feedback from professionals that gets you to that point of being an expert. So, for example, Josh Coleman, the researcher that highlighted that talent is overrated in his book, he highlighted that it took Tiger Woods a long time before he started to really win tournaments. Now, you can see Tiger Woods, if you search the internet, at 3 years old, driving a ball a significant distance. And so clearly he had skill. But what Coleman points out is that he wasn't winning tournaments at 3 years old. It still took him time before he was able to get to that point of being the expert in the field. Similarly, someone like John Lennon of the Beatles put in his 10 years in order to become an accomplished musician. So it apparently takes a number of years to gain a mastery over your domain, and not just years, but specific time and focused training. And then we can go on to the next step. So once we put in our domain mastery, then we need to think in terms of imitation. We need to think in terms maybe of identity, but we'll use the term imitation here. Generally, you need to spend some time imitating the style of those that you admire, especially in your early years. Taking some time and trying on, essentially, different ways of doing things, skills, ways of being, and you can kind of think of it in terms of identity formation, where there is an identity formation phase that a lot of people will go through, known as moratorium, where an individual tries on and imitates different people over a period of time and tries to figure out who they are as an artist. And that's a kind of thing that goes on with highly accomplished artists. So oftentimes you see this in training in art. Now, if you've ever been to the Louvre in Paris, France, you'll find, if you go down in the basement and sometimes in the back rooms, there are training schools for artists. And they will take art, and there's a lot of art that not just everything is on display. There's a lot of art in back rooms, and they will take some of this art from historical artists, and they will bring them out for the training schools. And these are examples from history of great artists, and they set them before the students so that the students can practice imitating these masters in order to develop their skills and move through that phase of imitation. And that is part of that imitation process that needs to take place at a high level in order to really kind of find your own place, your own artistic identity in some ways. Then there's another phase that the creative needs to go through, and that is dissatisfaction. And it seems strange and maybe counterintuitive to have a phase of dissatisfaction in the developmental process of being an excellent artist, but it takes time for someone to move from the conventional phase and then to see that there are weaknesses and holes in the domain, in the field. And it causes the person to ask the question of themselves, how can they improve things? How can I make things better now that I know things and I have skills? And this is where that artistic license may come in a little bit. If they feel that life is getting stagnant, or if they are dissatisfied, and so it pushes them with anxiety and with dissatisfaction to move to something else. And that moves us to the next stage of innovation. Now, within this innovation phase, then, there is the creative use of the skills and talents that the artist has in adding to the domain, to the field in a way that changes the field through the skills and talents and interests and focus of the artist. Now, of course, innovation in and of itself is not something that is unique just to the accomplished artist. I mean, every artist that has their own unique innovations. But it really takes, remember, the system of creativity in order for innovation to move through that system, for creativity to make true innovation happen. So what's going on here? So it isn't just the innovation phase, but it's also the elaboration of that innovation that needs to take place in order for there to be true excellence. So the elaboration of the innovation is something that needs to take place here. So now, people probably will argue with this example, but let's think in terms of athletes here. The great Canadian hockey player Wayne Gretzky, who had as one of his innovations to circle around the back of the net and dump the puck in the backside of the net. And it wasn't something that he did just once or for just one season. He did it over decades. And it was an elaboration of an innovative way of scoring goals. And the same thing for Tiger Woods and his ability to drive the golf ball. It took years. It wasn't just that he was good at long drives for a season. It was a career-defining part of his game. Taking time, years being spent elaborating, improving, tweaking, solidifying this innovation as being a part of the field and something that is significantly important. Think as well someone like Elvis Presley. When he started out, he was imitating other artists, and then he started to find that there were things within his field where that helped them to be successful. The way, for example, that he moved his hips, the way that he moved his legs. And so he kept doing that. Then he had that dissatisfaction and that transition that went on. But he kept some of his innovations and caused some of those innovations to really be solidified. And within this was a solidification of not just, movement, but of moving towards social justice and getting back to a spirituality, and then spending years and decades making these innovations of thinking of social justice and racial integration and engagement within the field became part of who he was. There was a true elaboration of that innovation. So much so that it changed the field of music. Before Elvis Presley, there was no rock and roll. After Elvis Presley, rock and roll was a dominant, powerful music art form. And the ways of dancing and movement within the musical industry has been forever changed because of Elvis Presley, even though he wasn't necessarily a great dancer. So the individual may spend years elaborating their innovation, going through different periods, or maybe a period where the artist goes through where they work in a single identifiable style, and then when they feel good about it, they may eventually leave that style and go on to something else. And when the innovation is truly elaborated, it may be brought to the attention of the field for either acceptance or rejection. Hopefully acceptance. And the creative person often then leaves this work to others to continue, and they move on to something else. Now, so let's look at creativity across the lifespan now. Harvey Lehman, someone that looked at achievement across the lifespan back in the 1950s. And he didn't look at particularly an age of achievement, but he suggested that there's a curvilinear relationship between achievement and age. And N. Keith Simonton suggests that there is this curvilinear relationship. That the relationship, there is a relationship between career age and the individual's achievement. Now, but Harvey Lehman suggests that this curvilinear relationship is chronological, whereas Simonton suggests that you can think of it in terms of career age, from the time you start your career to there is a lag before a great deal of success. So essentially, at the early part of a person's artistic life, they have less creative achievement. In the middle part of their life, they have the most creative achievement. And as they near the end of their life, there is going back down of achievement, goes back down again. So creative achievement and age, there seems to be a relationship that sometimes is called the backward J. That is, people have to learn skills very early on, within which the person is looking at. And so some researchers will suggest that there is a very different curve depending upon the field. So, for example, lyric poets have a different relationship between age and success than do, say, novelists, even though they're both writers. And there is a different relationship between nuclear physicists and medical researchers based upon age and achievement, even though both physicists and medical researchers are in the scientific fields. And this is true across eons. It seems to be true across centuries. It seems to be true across different cultures and around the world. And these findings have been found so that to be true across many researchers. So, for example, it seems to be that lyric poets and theoretical physicists and mathematicians have very early achievement. Their achievement seems to be best at the early part of their career. And it's interesting, if you look at Einstein, for example, his big discovery happened very early on in his life. If you look at lyric poets as well, their best work seems to be very early on in their life, like in their 20s. So many of our lyrical poets achieved their best work early in life. So now another interesting thing is that lyric poets also, interestingly, I'm not sure why, but they tend to die younger than do novelists. On average, 6 years earlier than do novelists do. On the other hand, novelists don't peak until much later in life, sometimes into their 50s is when they peak. And then the drop-off is very, very gradual, if it exists at all. Oftentimes novelists will work right until their death, and it just seems to get better. Oftentimes they produce these works, and it is just something that... So there's a very different relationship, my point is, between age and achievement depending upon what field you're in, what domain you're in. Oftentimes they produce, another thing that you might want to consider here is that if we look at case studies, artists tend to peak around the age of 30 to 40, whereas writers or novelists, for example, peak much later. And here, novelists will peak at this later time. And something that you might think is counterintuitive is musicians, too, tend to peak in their 40s and 50s. And you would think that it would happen earlier on in life, but it doesn't seem to be really the case. The research seems to suggest that a musician will be more productive and peak in their quality and quantity in their 40s and 50s. And this is not like lyric poets, who tend to peak in their 20s and 30s. So between different domains, there does seem to be this common reality that there is this gap, depending upon the domain and what that relationship is. And the Harvard researcher Shelley Carson, she highlights that writers have a mean age for their highest productivity that is much later than do poets. And so her researcher seems to confirm what Simonton consistently says, is that there is this difference between lyric poets and novelists. Now, some will argue that novelists need to have life experience to be able to put that down on the page. And so the longer you live, the more content you have to bring to the page, whereas lyric poets are driven primarily by high, intense emotion and the time that you have emotional thinking and high emotional intensity in having that content seems to be present in the late teens and early 20s. And so it seems to make sense that is why lyric poets will have the most productive time in their late teens, early 20s, maybe into their 30s, whereas novelists are just getting started at that point and seem to peak much later because they require a different quiver of arrows in order to be able to fulfill what they need to do. So, what does all of this mean? It really kind of means that we need to kind of be mindful of the field that you're in, and recognize that there are different parts to the career of a creative person. Perhaps it is mathematical skill that needs to happen early in life. Perhaps it is emotional content that is most important. And then it's going to depend upon what kind of domain you're in. So, for example, to achieve mathematicians, lyric poets, theoretical physicists all seem to achieve their greatest work early on in life. It seems to be that you need to be more open to ideas and thinking of possibilities. And because that happens earlier on in life, you're able to let all of your life experiences and the systems and everything come together to achieve that success early on in life. Whereas that is not the case with someone like a medical researcher or a novelist that tends to require more knowledge, more success, more life experience, and a greater amount of knowledge in order to achieve success. And so it takes longer for success to be found. Now, there is also the phenomenon known as the swan song. So it seems that there are some people that go through life, most people go through life and have their peak in their 30s and 40s in whatever domain, and then they gradually slow down and decline, in which they're still being productive, but maybe not producing as much. Maybe it's at a slower rate until they're near death. But for some, there comes this sudden inspiration of work, this creative work that really lets them be known. But usually, it's not their final work that does this. Oftentimes, their final work is not their best work. But sometimes the swan song is their best work. Now, Simonton would suggest that the top 10% of people who make creative achievements account for about 50% of all of the output that sustains within a culture. So the people that produce the best work are also responsible for the most creative work. I'm going to say that again. The people that produce the best work also are responsible for the most creative work. And this is going to tie in with mental health that we'll talk about in a few weeks' time, because being hypomanic can certainly help in this, where you just get really intensely involved in this. Now, Simonton also points out that the bottom 50% of artists or creatives account for about 15% of the output that sustains within culture. So this suggests that basically quality is a function of quantity. I'm going to say that again. Quality seems to be a function of quantity. The best work is done by the people that create the most work. Or maybe the most work is done by the people that do the best work. But in Simonton's historic metric, it is that quality is a function of quality. So at the time of your life when you are having the largest amount of output, you are also tending to have the highest quality of output. So how does this give us insight into your own lifespan as a creative individual? Now, the first thing is start early. Be precocious. Start as a kid. Start as a teenager. Follow your passion. Secondly, live a long time and don't retire. And thirdly, just keep spinning it out throughout your career. And we know that there are people that have just thrown out prodigious amounts of material. For example, the science fiction writer Isaac Asimov was writing 4 or 5 books a year and became a legend in science fiction field. So quality and quantity appear to be closely related, both in the arts as well as in the sciences. And the number of high quality works that a person comes up with seems to also be a function of the amount of work that they do overall. So if we look, for example, with Gershwin, the musician, had some great amount of work, but he also produced prodigiously. And some of his work, it really isn't that good, but he also came up with some phenomenal, mind-blowingly good works. So it does stand to reason that the more ideas that you come up with, the more products that you come out with, the more likely it is that some of them are going to be of very high quality. And so probably the people that do the best work also do some of the worst quality work, but it only takes one or two good quality things to make a reputation. So people tend to forget the bad stuff and they remember the good stuff when it comes to artistic works and creativity. Or it may be that because creativity is related to systems, the bad stuff just falls by the wayside as you receive feedback from other people. But you're engaged. That's the point. You don't give up just because you did 2 or 3 or 50 bad products, when you can have that one really awesome one that eventually comes along. So you can think of creativity as having the ability to capitalize on failure. Failure is really part of the process of creativity. You do it, you get it out there, some of it's going to be good and some of it's not going to be good, and you're going to learn from it, and you're going to take those 1 or 2 good quality things, and it's going to catch people's attention, and you're going to find your success. You know, it's kind of like a marriage or dating. You know, you can ask a lot of people on dates, but it only takes one person to say yes in order for you to be married. So don't be daunted by the failure. So when you look at the mean age for the best work and the most work across creative people, according to Shelley Carson, the best work and the most work tend to happen in the same 10-year time span. I'm going to say that again. The best work and the most work tend to happen in the same 10-year time span. Now, on the rare occasion, that doesn't happen, but as a general rule, the 10-year time span where the most work is done is also where the best work is done. So you have this curvilinear relationship. So at the early part of life, you're just getting going, and then the middle part of the life, you tend to peak, and then it tends to drop off. And this is true if you look at Simonton's definition of age as being when you start in the field, and it's also true when you look at the chronological age. When you start very early in life, it's slow to get going, but then there's this intense time of peak, and then it tends to drop off. Now, of course, there are the occasional one-hit wonders out there, but as a general rule, creativity seems to be a function of quantity and quality. The more stuff that is done, the higher quality the stuff tends to be. But then you have these one-hit wonders, so people like F. Scott Fitzgerald, who didn't produce a lot of work, but did have some very high-quality pieces. So, when you think about your own creative luminary that you'll be focusing on and kind of exploring a little bit about, give some thought to what was their developmental process like throughout their lifespan. What did it look like? And perhaps you can give some thought to your own passions within life and your own creative process throughout your life. What will it be like? What will you find a passion for? What will you learn and become the expert in? How will you spend your life? When will you be the most productive within your life? And will that be your best work? And that's it for our class on creativity and lifespan. I hope you enjoyed this week. You take care. Bye-bye.